Okay, it is time for that most classic of modeling exercises, modeling a wine glass. I know many of you are armed with the technology or knowledge to make these already, but we're going to go through it step by step here, because hopefully there will still be a couple of tips and tricks and things that you haven't considered that you can use in modeling a better and more effective wine glass. So let's start with a reference. As you're modeling objects that exist in the real world, or even if they don't exist in the real world, most of the time you'll start with a reference. Even video games have character artists that, or concept artists that draw out the character, and then they will draw out what's called modeling sheets, which will show the character in kind of standard static poses from a bunch of different angles, so then the character modelers can use those as reference in 3D and build according to those dimensions and proportions and all of that. So in a much simpler way, that's what we're going to do with this wine glass. So what I did is went to Google and searched wine glass and went to images. I'm sure you're all familiar with that process. I'm going to choose this one. It's the fourth option. It's an IKEA wine glass called the Hederlig, which I'm sure means something. And I'm going to view the image, and I'm going to right-click on the image. There we go. Save image as. At this point, I'm going to navigate to my project directory. Okay, class demos. And I'm going to save this in the source images folder. Okay. I'm also going to rename this to just wine glass. I don't need the IKEA name. I don't need all of these numbers and letters after it. There we go. Wine glass. I don't also need it to say clear glass. Okay, wine glass. And maybe I'll add REF at the end to know, so I know it's a reference image and not a texture image or something like that. So wine glass ref. Click save. And then I can get rid of that. I don't need those open anymore. Back in Maya, I will save this scene. I don't really need to save it, but I'm going to save it anyway. And do File, New Scene. Remember, I have my project already set. If I was just opening this up, I would just set my project. So File, Set Project. And then navigate to my class demos and click Set. All right, now what we need to do is bring in that picture as a reference. The way that the easiest way to bring in an image as a reference is in the viewport. We've got this icon right here. Don't click it yet. It's the 5th one over, and it's not actually going to give me the tooltip, is it? All right. If you click on it, it's going to open a dialog box. It's the Insert Image Plane tool. But the way that it works is it inserts the image plane based on whatever view your viewport is currently in. And right now I'm in the perspective view. So if I insert that image, choose it, hit enter, okay, click open. And now it's inserted it here. And if I go to my front view, I can't see it. Oh, there it is, off on this weird angle. It is not even remotely helpful. So I'm going to undo that. Now I'm going to go into my front view. So I'm going to tap the spacebar, get to my quad view, and then go to front view here. And now I'm going to go and click on that button. Now, the reason why I saved that reference image in that specific source images folder is because Maya is looking in that folder by default for any reference image. It looks there for references, or if you're applying textures or whatever, that's what the source images folder is for. And this way, when you export projects and send them to me, if you're following this structure, everything stays together. All right, so I got wine glass reference. You can see I have a preview of it right there. I click open, and now it is there in my front view. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to position this and get this ready for modeling. It's selected right now. I'm going to first create a layer from selected, and I'm going to say wine glass ref. Click save. I'm going to also name the image plane. All right, so I've added this image plane to its own layer. So layers, create layer from selected. I renamed the layer. And what I want to do is I want to set this as a reference layer, which means once I deselect it, I can't select it again. Actually, I lied. I don't want to set it as a reference just yet. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I want to open up the attribute editor, which we haven't really talked about yet. That is, you might see the tab on the side of your view. Okay, kind of replaces the channel box. You can also get to it. It is this icon on the top right of your screen. Show Hide Attribute Editor. You can also hit Control-A once or twice, and it will pop up. Once I have that with the image plane selected, I can adjust the alpha. I've got this handy slider. Set the transparency. So I'm going to set it to 0.5. Okay. And there's a bunch of other things that you can do to image planes here. A bunch of other things. I'm not really worried about that. You can also set it to only display in the front view. So if, when you go to quad view, you don't want to see it here, then you can set that to display looking through camera and front. So it's only in the front view. I'm going to keep it in all views. After that, I'm going to go back to the channel box, layer editor. Actually, I don't even need to do that. I just want to move it up so that the bottom of the wine glass is at the origin. So I'm just going to grab the Y handle, and I'm going to move it to about there. Now, the thing about this picture is that it is taken in the real world, which means it is taken with perspective. All right? But this is a orthographic view that does not have perspective. So there's going to be some amount of interpolation that you're going to have to do to get things to work. It's not going to line up perfectly with the picture. No reference image will. But I'm going to move it so that basically the edge, the bottom of the right and left edges are at the origin of the scene. Okay, so once I have that in position, now I'm going to set my reference layer to actually be a reference layer so that when I deselect and reselect, I can't select that image plane. All right. We're going to actually add some geometry. So the first thing that we need to do when we model any object is figure out what is the base primitive that would be the best starting point for this object. Start with a cylinder. So I'm going to click on the cylinder polymodeling option here. And the very first thing that I'm going to do is name it. I'm going to call this wine glass. Nice and descriptive. Then I'm going to go down to my inputs. I can shrink the layers a little bit. Go to my inputs, and I'm going to set my default options. The first thing that I'm going to do is set my radius. I'm just going to highlight that and middle click and drag in the viewport. And I'm going to focus on the stem here. I can even move this up. All right, it doesn't have to be perfect right now. I'm just getting it close. The height I will adjust as well. All right, that works for now. Subdivisions, this one's important. I'm going to jump to my perspective view. I mentioned this earlier. You don't want to add any more geometry than you absolutely need. For this case, in the wine glass, I'm going to just set it to 8. That will be plenty of geometry to get a smooth wine glass. Next, subdivisions, height, and caps. I'm fine with it right there. So I will leave those at 1. And I think I'm good there. All right. So the next thing that I want to do, I'm going to start working with the base of the wine glass. So I'm going to choose faces first. I'm going to select all of these faces on the bottom. I'm just going to delete them. I'm actually going to do the same thing at the top now too while I'm at it. All right, and delete. So now I just have a hollow tube. And from there, I'm going to go into my edge mode, and this is where I'm going to spend most of my time with the modeling. So in edge mode, I'm going to double click on that bottom edge, and just to prove that I have the whole edge ring selected, you can kind of see it there in the perspective view. So I'm going to take this bottom edge and I'm going to move it to about the end of the straight part of the stem. And now I'm going to extrude. So I'm going to shift, right click, and click extrude edge. And I'm not too worried about any of these options. I have keep faces together on. But I'm just going to hit W and just move. All right, you can also just adjust thickness. I like to do it this way. One note about extruding is when you're undoing the extrusion, oftentimes you need to hit extrude a couple times or undo a couple times and make sure that you see undo extrude at the bottom of your screen. Otherwise, you can get hidden geometry. Okay, it'll look like you've undid the extrusion, but it's still there.
Did you select the whole edge?
So I've moved it down there. I'm going to shift right click and extrude. And I'm going to move it down to about here. And then I'm going to scale. I'm going to make sure I'm scaling in all directions to about the width of where that stem meets the base. Okay. If the object starts getting in the way, I'll hit 4 on my number pad to go into wireframe view. And at this point, you can see the background image is a little bit too opaque. It's kind of getting in the way, so I'm going to turn off the reference, select my background image. I got to go back into object mode. Select my background image. And in the attribute editor, I'm going to bring my alpha gain down a little bit further to about a quarter, 0.25. All right, now I can go back. I'll set that back to a reference layer, go back to my object, and continue. So I'm going to double click, make sure I select that whole bottom ring again. Now I'm going to extrude it again. Scale that out. Move it down to right about there. Right to the extreme edge limit. And I'm going to extrude it one more time. So shift right click, extrude, hit W to move it down to there. Okay. All right. So there's a couple more things I want to do at the bottom half of this, and then we'll move up to the actual cup part of the wine glass. Example 2. So what I want to do here is now I want to close in the bottom of this wine glass, and up until now I've just been doing extrude and then going to move or scale. But I can also, in the extrude tool, I can just use the offset option here and then select it and middle click and drag. And that is giving me not the direction that I want it to go. There we go. So I want to do actually local translate, and I'm going to bring that in most of the way. Okay. And then that leaves me with just a small hole to fill in. I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. Okay, so what I want to do here, and this is a new thing that I haven't really covered yet, is I want to fill this hole in so that it's a solid piece. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to select, and I need to do this so that I'm left with all 4-sided faces. And this is one of the reasons why I choose 8 or 12 subdivisions, because they just fill in very nicely. Choosing prime numbers gets really tricky with this, so don't choose things like 13 and 17. So I'm going to select these two opposite edges, shift right click and bridge. What that does is it connects them with a face. That also, because I have an 8-sided hole here, leaves me with a 4-sided hole here, which I can select those edges, shift right click and fill hole. And do the same thing on the other side. And I really only actually have to select one of these edges. And then shift right click, fill hole. Okay, so now that's solid. I can select one edge, move it around, and then you can see that's all connected.
So why didn't you just do the fill hole right at the beginning instead of?
I did it this way because if I just select the whole thing and fill the hole, it fills it as an 8-sided face. So I don't have quads, and that limits how I can adjust this in the future. So we want to make sure that we stay with quads, and that's why I'm going to bridge one face first, and then I can fill the other two in. Okay, so now that I have that established, I'm going to work my way up the wine glass. So I'm going to jump back into my front view. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. And now that with Maya 2018, I can just hold down the shift key and click and drag to extrude. It really makes this a pretty quick endeavor. And I'm just roughly lining it up. I will go back and add more detail to areas that need it later. But it's just shift and drag, and then making sure I'm extruding in all directions. And let's see if I can, I'll do this and show you kind of in two views so you can see a little bit better sense of how this is going to come together. So shift, click, and drag. Scale it up to the edge of the glass. Back to my move tool. Right about there seems to be about the peak. Oops. Let me undo that. Let's scale it back. Okay. Go back to move, shift, click, extrude. I'm going to go all the way up to the top. And I'm going to scale it down to there. Now, before I go back and do the inside of the glass, because it has some thickness, I'm going to add a little bit of extra detail where it needs it. So I'm going to go to wireframe. And if I zoom in here, it's kind of tough to tell, but this is where my edge is, and this is where the edge of the glass is. So I need to adjust that. So I'm going to insert some edge loops, and I'm going to do 2 edge loops. I'm going to insert them right there, and then I'm going to scale them in. And actually, I want to scale them in. I don't want to scale them vertically. I only want to scale them along the X and the Z. And because I can see my reference image in the 3D viewport, I can go until it just about lines up. That looks good. And then I think I'm going to add one more edge loop. Whoops, there we go. Add one more edge loop here, but I just want to do a single edge loop. Put it right about there, and I'm just going to move it down a touch so it's slightly concave. Good. All right, let's look over the rest of this. Looks like this needs to scale down a little bit. And this can probably scale down a little bit. Good. And then I'm a little outside the bounds up here, so I'm going to add one edge loop in the middle. Actually, I'll add 2 edge loops. And I'm going to scale these in a little bit too. It just gives it a little bit more shape. Let's check this profile. That looks okay, but we need one more edge loop here. Let's do 1 edge loop right about there and scale that out so we define that a little bit better. And if I go to solid view, you can see that it bulges out a little bit here, so I'm going to add 1 more edge loop. Insert edge loop right about there, and I'll scale that out too. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the outer dimensions of my wine glass. Now I want to define the thickness of the wine glass. So I'm going to jump back into front view, turn on wireframe, hide that so I can see what's going on. So shift right click, extrude the edge. I'm just going to scale it in a little bit. Kind of tough to see where it is. So I need to jump to my perspective view. Hit F to focus on it. Scale a little bit. That looks good. All right, back to front view. And shift left click and drag on the move tool. And what I'm going to do here, I can actually turn off my reference for this part of it, is I'm just going to mirror where I put my edge loops on the outside and do the same thing here. So I'm going to move it down to about the same level. I'll scale it out so that these are even. Okay, so I've got an even, consistent thickness. And then do the same thing. And then when I get to where the bottom of the glass is, which will be here in just a second, we'll go right about there. All right, this is the part where you just kind of start almost guessing, just to finish off the bottom of this interior. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my perspective view, and I'm left with just, whoa. So what happened here is at one point I stopped scaling in all directions, and I was only scaling in one direction. So I got to jump back and redo that. That's why it's important to look from all angles.
Is there a history window?
Okay, so go down here, scale that down. One last one, scale down just a little bit, or move it down just a little bit, scale it in. Now we jump back to my 3D view, and I've got this hole in here that I need to fill. I'll do it just like I did at the bottom. So I'll select opposite edges, shift right click, and bridge. Don't worry about all the other options in bridge. We'll get to that at some point. And then I will fill these holes in here. Okay, so now I have a wine glass, and if I jump and compare that in the front view, turn my reference layer back on, it's looking pretty good. But now, as a little bit of bonus, I'm really happy with how this looks. But I mentioned earlier the smooth preview. Okay, this is what it looks with smooth preview. And that looks pretty good. But we could actually make it a little bit better and sharpen this up. And I'm going to save that for next week. So that's the quick and dirty wine glass tutorial. Hopefully this will help for your homework. And then next week we'll talk more about refining this technique.